The Japanese admirals were stunned by Midway, until they realized their carrier fleet was gone. Section 1. The Calm Before the Trap. June 3, 1942. Dawn breaks over the Central Pacific, more than 1,000 miles northwest of Hawaii. Aboard the Japanese flagship Akagi, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stands on the bridge, binoculars pressed to his eyes as the horizon slowly brightens. The sea is calm, deceptively calm, its surface barely disturbed by the long gray shadows of the combined fleet cutting through the water. Somewhere beyond that empty blue expanse lies Midway Atoll, small, isolated, and, in Yamamoto's mind, the final bait that will draw the Americans into annihilation. Below deck, engines thrum steadily. The air smells of oil, salt, and fresh paint. Sailors move with quiet confidence, voices low, boots striking steel in disciplined rhythm. This fleet has not known true defeat. 6 months earlier, at Pearl Harbor, these same carriers shattered American naval power in a single morning. Since then, Japanese naval aviation has swept across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, almost unopposed. To many aboard these ships, Midway feels less like a battle and more like a formality. Vice Admiral Nagumo, commander of the 1st Air Fleet, watches the sky from Akagi's flight deck. His force, the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, includes 4 fleet carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Together, they carry more than 240 aircraft and the elite aviators who had devastated Pearl Harbor, the Indian Ocean, and Darwin. Nagumo's orders are clear: strike Midway, destroy its airfields, and prepare to eliminate whatever remains of the U.S. Pacific Fleet when it rushes out to respond. What Nagumo does not know, what Yamamoto does not know, is that the Americans are already waiting. Far to the east, on Midway itself, U.S. Navy code clerks have been working around the clock. Months earlier, in dimly lit rooms at Pearl Harbor, cryptanalysts under Commander Joseph Rockefort had broken enough of the Japanese Naval Code Gen. 25 to uncover the enemy's plan. The mysterious target labeled AF was confirmed to be Midway after a simple deception, a false message reporting a water shortage. When Japanese intelligence reported that AF is short of water, the trap was set. Now, as the Japanese fleet advances, American carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, are already positioned northeast of Midway, hidden by weather and radio silence. Their commanders, Rear Admirals Raymond Spruance and Frank Jack Fletcher, know they are outnumbered. They also know something the Japanese do not: when and where the enemy will strike. At 4:30 a.m. on June 4th, the stillness aboard Nagumo's carrier shatters. Engines roar to life as the first wave of Japanese aircraft lifts off toward Midway. Bombers, torpedo planes, fighters, climbing into the pink-streaked dawn. The decks tremble beneath spinning propellers. Signal flags snap in the wind. To the men watching them disappear into the clouds, it is a familiar sight, one that has always ended in victory. On Midway, radar operators spot the incoming raid. Sirens wail. Anti-aircraft guns swing skyward. American pilots scramble into the air in outdated fighters and torpedo planes, many knowing they are flying into near-certain death. They go anyway. The island shakes as bombs fall, fuel tanks erupt, and hangars burn. Yet when the Japanese strike leader reports back to Nagumo, his message carries an unexpected note of caution. Midway is damaged, but not neutralized. A second strike may be necessary. That single report plants the seed of hesitation. Nagumo stands at the center of a storm of decisions. His reserve aircraft are armed with torpedoes for an anticipated naval battle, as doctrine demands. Rearming them with bombs for a second strike on Midway will take time. Time he does not believe he has if American carriers appear. Then, at 7:28 a.m., a scout plane from the cruiser Tone sends a delayed but chilling message. Enemy ships sighted to the east. Suddenly, the certainty aboard Akagi begins to crack. Nagumo orders his decks cleared, his aircraft rearmed again, bombs swapped for torpedoes, then torpedoes back to bombs, then back again as reports change. Hangar decks fill with fueled planes, stacked munitions, and exposed ordnance. The carriers are at their most vulnerable, though no one yet realizes it. Above the fleet, American search planes fan out over empty ocean. They are desperately low on fuel, their crews tense and silent. Somewhere below them lies the most powerful carrier force on Earth, and within hours, it will cease to exist. The Japanese admirals believe the Americans are reacting. In reality, the Americans are already striking. Section 2. First contact in the empty sky. June 4th, 1942. 7:45 a.m. Pacific Time. High above the ocean east of Midway, Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky grips the control column of his SBD Dauntless dive bomber. Below him, nothing but endless blue. His fuel gauge is dropping faster than he likes. The flight from USS Enterprise has already gone longer than planned, and the Japanese carriers are nowhere in sight. McClusky knows what this means. If he guesses wrong, he will never make it back. Around him, his squadron flies in loose formation, engines droning steadily, cockpits hot despite the altitude. Sweat runs down faces behind goggles. Radios crackle with fragments of reports from other American aircraft. Confused, overlapping, grim. Torpedo squadrons from Hornet and Enterprise have already found the enemy, and they're being slaughtered. Down at wavetop height, TBD, Devastator torpedo planes skim the ocean toward Nagumo's carriers. They are slow, obsolete, and painfully exposed. Japanese Zero fighters descend on them like hawks. Tracer fire rips through thin fuselages. Planes burst into flame and slam into the sea, leaving nothing but oil slicks and debris. One after another, American torpedo squadrons are annihilated. VT, 8 from Hornet loses all but one man. VT, 6 from Enterprise is shredded. VT, 3 from Yorktown fares little better. Yet none of them turn back. They press in, flying straight and level, dropping torpedoes under withering fire. They score no hits. From the decks of Akagi and Kaga, Japanese sailors cheer as American planes fall burning from the sky. To them, it looks like Pearl Harbor all over again. Enemy aircraft destroyed before they can strike. The Zero pilots, low on fuel but exultant, chase the last survivors to the horizon. In that moment of triumph, the Japanese carrier force commits a fatal error. The Zeros are down low. The decks are cluttered. The air patrol overhead is thin. And above them, unseen, McClusky is still searching. At 9:20 a.m., nearly out of fuel, McClusky spots something unexpected. A single Japanese destroyer, Hiryu, racing north at full speed, throwing a long white wake across the ocean. He doesn't know it yet, but Hiryu had been delayed hunting an American submarine and is now rushing to rejoin Nagumo's carriers. McClusky makes a split-second decision. He turns his entire squadron to follow the wake. It is the most important guess of the Pacific War. Minutes later, the blue emptiness breaks open. Below the Dauntless, 4 Japanese carriers steam in perfect formation, their decks crowded with aircraft being refueled and rearmed. Bombs and torpedoes lie exposed. Fuel hoses snake across the deck. The ships are alive with activity and utterly unprepared. McClusky does not hesitate. Attack! The American dive bombers roll inverted and plunge from the sky. Sirens scream aboard the Japanese carriers as lookouts finally spot them. Anti-aircraft, guns open fire, shells bursting black in the air, but it is too late. The Dauntless scream downward at nearly 250 miles per hour, aiming for the red suns painted on wooden decks. Lieutenant Richard Best leads his section straight toward Akagi. He releases his bomb at barely 1,500 feet and pulls hard, blacking out briefly as the aircraft claws back upward. The bomb punches through the flight deck near the island and explodes deep inside the hangar. On Kaga, multiple bombs slam home in rapid succession. Flames erupt instantly, fed by aviation fuel and stacked munitions. Aircraft are hurled aside like toys. Men disappear in fire and smoke. On Soryu, another bomb detonates among fully fueled planes. Within minutes, the carrier is a roaring inferno. The transformation is almost, yet the battle is not over. One carrier remains untouched. To the north, Hiryu has escaped the initial attack. Her commander, Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, reacts instantly. He orders counterstrikes launched even as smoke rises from the horizon where his sister ships burn. Within the hour, Japanese dive bombers roar toward the American carriers. The stunned realization begins to settle over the Japanese fleet, but the final reckoning is still coming. Section 3. The Counterblow from Hiryu. June 4th, 1942. Late morning. Aboard the carrier Hiryu, Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi stands rigid on the bridge, his face expressionless as thick columns of black smoke rise on the southern horizon. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, the core of Japan's striking power, are burning wrecks. The scale of the disaster is impossible to grasp, even for a veteran like Yamaguchi. Yet shock has no place here. Only action. Yamaguchi knows something critical that the Americans do not yet know. One Japanese carrier still lives, and she still carries a full striking force. Launch immediately, he orders. On Hiryu's flight deck, crews move with frantic precision. Dive bombers and fighters are rushed into position. Engines scream to life. The smell of fuel hangs heavy in the air as aircraft are hurled skyward one after another. These pilots are among the most experienced in the Imperial Navy. They have attacked Pearl Harbor. They have survived the Indian Ocean raids. Now they are flying into what may be the most important mission of their lives. At 10:25 a.m., Hiryu's first strike group forms up and heads east. Far away, on the deck of USS Yorktown, damaged crews are still repairing scars from Coral Sea. Only days earlier, intelligence had convinced the Japanese that Yorktown was sunk. Instead, she had limped back to Pearl Harbor and been patched up in an astonishing 72 hours. Her men know they're fighting on borrowed time. Radar contacts appear shortly before noon. American fighters scramble, climbing hard into the sun. The sky erupts with twisting contrails and flashes of gunfire. Some Japanese bombers are shot down, but enough break through. Dive bombers scream out of the clouds toward Yorktown. Bombs fall. One punches through the flight deck and detonates deep inside the ship. Another explodes nearby, tearing through catwalks and gun positions. Fires erupt. The carrier shudders and slows. Smoke billows skyward, thick and black. But Yorktown does not die. Damage control teams flood compartments, jettison wreckage, and fight flames hand to hand. Within an hour, miraculously, the ship is moving again. Her crew signals proudly. Yorktown back in action. Yamaguchi, receiving reports from returning pilots, believes he has sunk one American carrier. He is wrong, and that mistake will doom Hiryu. Determined to finish the job, Yamaguchi orders a second strike, this time torpedo bombers. They take off in the early afternoon, flying low over the waves. Again, American radar picks them up. Again, fighters intercept. Again, some get through. At 2:30 p.m., torpedoes streak toward Yorktown. One slams into her port side, then another, then a third. The ship lists violently. Engines fail. Power flickers and dies. This time, Yorktown is finished. Captain Elliot Buckmaster gives the order to abandon ship. Sailors climb down ropes and nets, leaping into the sea as oil spreads across the water. The once proud carrier lies dead in the water, her flag still flying. For a moment, the Japanese taste something like victory again, but the price has already been paid. The torpedo bombers that struck Yorktown have given away Hiryu's position. American search planes spot the lone carrier in the late afternoon. The report flashes back to the remaining U.S. carriers. Hiryu is steaming north, launching and recovering aircraft. There is no hesitation now. At 4:30 p.m., dive bombers from Enterprise and Hornet lift off for the final strike. Among them is Lieutenant Commander Richard Best, already wounded and exhausted, yet determined to see the mission through. They find Hiryu silhouetted against the setting sun. Anti-aircraft fire explodes around them as they roll into their dives. The ship maneuvers hard, throwing up walls of water, but she cannot escape. For bombs hit. One detonates among parked aircraft. Another punches through the deck near the forward elevator. Flames engulf the hangar. Fuel ignites. Planes explode where they stand. Within minutes, Hiryu is burning from bow to stern. Admiral Yamaguchi remains aboard. He refuses to abandon ship. As night falls, the last operational Japanese carrier drifts, crippled and aflame. The sea around her glows orange with reflected fire. By morning, she will be scuttled by her own destroyers. For carriers, for hours, the unimaginable has happened. Across the darkening Pacific, American pilots limp home on fumes, some ditching into the sea, others landing with engines coughing their last. They do not yet fully understand what they have done, only that the enemy has gone quiet. For the Japanese Navy, silence carries a terrible meaning. The carrier fleet that once ruled the Pacific has ceased to exist. Section 4. The Night of Realization. June 4th to 5th, 1942. Night settles over the Pacific like a heavy curtain. The fires aboard Hiryu burn through the darkness, a funeral pyre visible for miles. By midnight, her crew has abandoned her. At dawn, Japanese destroyers fire torpedoes into the listing hull to send her to the bottom. When the sea finally closes over Hiryu, the first air fleet, the weapon that had shattered American power at Pearl Harbor, vanishes with her. Aboard the battleship Yamato, far to the west, Admiral Yamamoto receives the reports in fragments. Carrier lost. Then another. Then another. Communications are confused, delayed, incomplete, but the truth slowly assembles itself into something unmistakable. All 4 carriers are gone. For a man who had warned that Japan could not win a long war with the United States, the realization is crushing. Yamamoto had hoped Midway would be the decisive blow, the battle that would break American morale and force negotiations. Instead, it has done the opposite. The Americans have not only fought, they have anticipated, adapted, and struck with devastating precision. Yamamoto orders a withdrawal. It is an order that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Throughout the night, Japanese ships turn westward, slipping away under radio silence. The once mighty combined fleet retreats without having seen the American carriers it came to destroy. There is no pursuit. The Americans are exhausted, low on fuel, and still unsure if more enemy carriers lurk beyond the horizon. On June 5th, American aircraft conduct cautious searches, attacking stragglers. The heavy cruiser Mikoma is caught and bombed repeatedly, eventually sinking with great loss of life. Her sister ship Mogami barely escapes, shattered and burning. These are final, grim punctuation marks on a battle already decided. Back near Midway, the wounded USS Yorktown still floats, stubbornly refusing to sink. Salvage crews return to the carrier, hoping to tow her to safety. She lists heavily, but her compartments hold. For 2 days, it seems she might survive. Then, on June 6th, the Japanese submarine I-168 slips through the screen of American destroyers. 2 torpedoes slam into Yorktown. Another strikes the destroyer USS Hammond, which breaks in half and sinks within minutes. The carrier's fate is sealed. On June 7th, Yorktown finally rolls over and disappears beneath the waves. Her loss is painful, but it cannot obscure the larger truth. The United States has lost 1 carrier. Japan has lost 4, and with them, hundreds of irreplaceable pilots and aircrew. These men were not easily replaced. Japan's training pipeline was long, rigid, and elite. The Americans, by contrast, were just beginning to unleash their industrial and training power. On Midway Island, Marines and sailors walk among wreckage and bomb craters, stunned by how close they came to destruction and how completely the tide has turned. Only days earlier, many believed the Pacific War might be lost. Now, for the first time since Pearl Harbor, there is a sense of momentum. In Tokyo, the truth is buried. The Japanese public is told of a great victory. Losses are minimized. Names are withheld. But within the Navy, the damage cannot be hidden. Officers speak in low voices. Promotions are delayed. Careers quietly end. Everyone understands what has happened, even if they cannot yet say it aloud. The doctrine that had guided Japanese naval warfare, the decisive carrier strike, has failed when faced with intelligence, timing, and chance. For the Americans, Midway is not celebrated as a triumphal parade. It is met with sober acknowledgement. Admiral Chester Nimitz understands how narrow the margin was, how close disaster came. A single decision, a single missighting, a single bomb falling seconds later could have changed everything. But history does not record near misses. It records outcomes. In the outcome of Midway, the admirals who once believed the Pacific belonged to them now face a war they can no longer control. The shock has passed. What remains is the realization. Section 5. Aftermath across two navies. June 1942. In the days following Midway, the Pacific feels strangely quiet. The great clash of carriers is over, but its echoes ripple outward, touching every corner of both navies. Ships return to ports scarred and depleted. Men stare out across the water, replaying moments they will never forget. At Pearl Harbor, USS Enterprise and USS Hornet arrive first. Their decks are nearly empty. Many aircraft never came back. Some pilots ditched close enough to be rescued. Others vanished without a trace. On the piers, ground crews and officers count survivors with growing dread as familiar faces fail to appear. Admiral Raymond Spruance steps ashore to muted congratulations. He is praised, but not flamboyantly. Everyone present understands how close the battle came to catastrophe. Intelligence officers pore over after-action reports. Pilots are debriefed until their voices go hoarse. Maps are marked and remarked. The question that dominates every conversation is not how the Americans won, but how narrowly they avoided losing everything. For the pilots who survived, Midway is a haunting memory. Many had watched friends die horribly, planes shredded by gunfire, men trapped in burning cockpits or swallowed by the sea. Torpedo squadron veterans, in particular, carry a bitter pride. They know their attacks failed tactically, yet without them, the Japanese fighters would not have been drawn down low. Without them, the dive bombers might never have found clear skies. At ceremonies held quietly on deck, names are read aloud. The sea receives its dead. Across the Pacific, the mood is far darker. Japanese ships limp back toward home waters in silence. Flags are flown at half-mast. Survivors of the carrier crews are redistributed, their identities deliberately blurred. Officially, nothing disastrous has happened. Unofficially, the Imperial Japanese Navy is in mourning. Admiral Nagumo is relieved of command months later. The decision is never openly linked to Midway, but everyone understands why. His reputation, once glittering after Pearl Harbor, is irreparably damaged. He will later die during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, commanding a land-based force, far from the carriers that once defined his career. Admiral Yamamoto remains in command, but Midway weighs heavily on him. He knows the strategic truth better than anyone. Japan has lost its margin of superiority. The United States can replace ships, planes, and pilots at a rate Japan cannot match. Yamamoto had gambled everything on Midway to avoid a war of attrition. He has lost that gamble. Within Japanese naval circles, Midway becomes a word spoken softly, if at all. Lessons are debated, but rarely implemented. Training programs remain rigid. Pilot replacement remains slow. The belief in spirit and courage over material reality persists, even as evidence mounts against it. Meanwhile, American shipyards roar to life. In California, Washington, and along the East Coast, keels are laid for new Essex-class carriers. Assembly lines produce aircraft by the thousands. New pilots flood training fields across the country. The United States Navy begins to expand, not incrementally, but exponentially. At Midway itself, repairs begin almost immediately. Runways are patched. Guns are reset. The atoll becomes a forward base, a stepping stone for the long road westward. The island that was nearly overrun becomes a symbol, small, battered, but unbroken. Strategically, the consequences of Midway begin to unfold within weeks. Japanese plans to threaten Hawaii are abandoned. Resources are redirected south, toward a new defensive perimeter. The Americans, seizing the initiative, begin planning their first offensive in the Pacific. Its name will be Guadalcanal. The balance has shifted, not just in ships lost, but in confidence. American commanders now believe they can defeat the Japanese at sea. Japanese commanders begin to fear that even well-laid plans may unravel under the weight of American intelligence and industrial power. Midway is no longer just a battle. It is a dividing line. Before Midway, Japan advances. After Midway, Japan retreats. And yet, for the men who fought there, history feels less clean. They remember chaos, fear, confusion, and moments of pure chance. A delayed scout plane. A destroyer's wake. A bomb released seconds before anti-aircraft fire could find its mark. The Pacific War will rage on for 3 more years, growing more brutal with each island and each sea lane contested. But every major engagement that follows carries Midway's shadow. Because in June 1942, the impossible happened. The fleet that had stunned the world was stunned in return. Section 6. The Shadow of Midway. Late June 1942. The Pacific does not erupt into silence so much as it exhales. After the violence of Midway, the ocean feels vast again, but it is no longer neutral. Every commander, every pilot, every sailor now measures distance, time, and risk differently. The rules have changed. At Pearl Harbor, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz studies the latest intelligence summaries in his headquarters carved into the volcanic rock of Oahu. The reports confirm what he already suspects. Japanese fleet movements are cautious, fragmented. There is no immediate counteroffensive, no bold thrust. The enemy that once struck with breathtaking confidence is now probing, reacting, feeling its way forward. Nimitz understands the significance immediately. Midway has not ended the war, but it has broken the rhythm of Japanese operations. He gathers his senior commanders. The atmosphere in the room is sober, not celebratory. Charts of the Solomon Islands are rolled out across the table. Guadalcanal, Tulagi, and the surrounding waters are marked in red grease pencil. Japanese engineers are building an airfield there, an airfield that could threaten the sea lanes between the United States and Australia. Before Midway, such a project might have been left to mature, then crushed by overwhelming Japanese carrier power. After Midway, it becomes an opportunity. The decision is made quietly, almost cautiously. The United States will go on the offensive, not with a grand fleet action, but with a risky amphibious landing at the edge of Japanese control. The gamble is immense. American forces are still inexperienced. Logistics are stretched, but waiting only favors the enemy. Midway has created a window, and windows in war do not stay open long. Thousands of miles away, in Japan, the Imperial Navy struggles to redefine itself. Carrier divisions that once trained together no longer exist. Survivors from Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu are reassigned to other units. Their experience is difficult to integrate into a doctrine built on flawless execution rather than recovery from disaster. New carriers are under construction, but they will take time. More critically, new pilots take even longer. The loss of veteran aircrews at Midway is catastrophic in ways that numbers alone cannot convey. These men were not simply pilots. They were instructors, tacticians, leaders in the air. Their replacements will have fewer hours, less combat experience, and less confidence. This gap will widen with every subsequent battle. Some Japanese officers recognize the danger. Quiet memos circulate. Proposals are made to accelerate training, to conserve aircrews, to adjust tactics. Most are ignored. The belief persists that decisive spirit can overcome material disadvantage. That one great victory can still reverse the tide. That Midway was an aberration, a fluke born of bad luck rather than systemic vulnerability. Meanwhile, American pilots study Midway in excruciating detail. The torpedo squadrons are dissected. New tactics are developed. Fighter coordination improves. Radar control becomes more refined. The painful lessons bought with blood are not wasted. By August 1942, When American Marines land on Guadalcanal, Midway's influence is everywhere. Carrier commanders are cautious but aggressive. Air patrols are layered. Communication between ships improves. Intelligence officers are listened to, not sidelined. The Japanese respond fiercely, but their blows lack the cohesion of earlier campaigns. Carrier battles around the Solomons, Eastern Solomons, Santa Cruz, are brutal and costly for both sides. Yet even when the Japanese score tactical successes, something is missing. They no longer dominate the tempo. Each clash bleeds their remaining veteran pilots. Each replacement is slightly less prepared than the last. The downward slope that began at Midway steepens month by month. For American sailors, Midway becomes a quiet touchstone. Few boast about it. Many barely speak of it at all. But in moments of doubt, during long nights at general quarters, during carrier turns into the wind under threat of attack, men remember that once, against all odds, they had caught the enemy off balance and won. That memory matters. Years later, veterans will say that Midway was the moment they stopped fearing the Japanese Navy as invincible. Respect remained. Caution remained. But the aura was gone. And in war, belief can be as powerful as steel. Even as the Pacific War grinds forward through blood-soaked jungles and contested seas, Midway endures as a silent force shaping decisions. Every Japanese operation now carries the weight of that loss. Every American plan is buoyed by the knowledge that preparation, intelligence, and timing can overturn apparent inferiority. The admirals who were stunned that day never truly recover. They have seen the future. Section 7. The Long Echo of a Single Day. July 1942. The Pacific sun rises and sets, as it always has, indifferent to human loss. But the men who move across its surface now carry Midway with them like a permanent scar. On destroyer bridges, in carrier-ready rooms, inside submarine control rooms, conversations drift back to those hours on June 4th. Not as legend, as warning. For the Japanese Navy, the psychological wound proves as damaging as the material loss. Training exercises resume, but they feel hollow. New pilots struggle to match the precision once expected as routine. Deck crews, lacking seasoned leaders, hesitate under pressure. Carrier commanders, haunted by Midway, become more cautious, sometimes too cautious. Aggressive maneuver gives way to defensive instinct. In staff colleges and war rooms, Midway is studied, but selectively. Japanese doctrine emphasizes what went wrong tactically: search patterns, deck cycles, scouting delays, without confronting the deeper issue: an over-reliance on perfect execution and an underestimation of the enemy's ability to think, adapt, and deceive. American intelligence had not merely intercepted messages. It had reshaped the battlefield before a single aircraft took off. That realization unsettles Japanese planners. Codes are changed. Security tightens. But the damage is done. The myth of informational superiority is broken. Admiral Yamamoto, restless and increasingly isolated, pushes for another decisive engagement. He believes only a crushing victory can restore balance and morale. Yet every proposal runs into the same obstacle. The carriers are not ready. The air groups are not ready. Time, once Japan's ally, is now its enemy. In contrast, time works relentlessly in America's favor. By late 1942, new carriers join the fleet. USS Essex is commissioned, the first of many. Each one represents not just steel and machinery, but a system refined by Midway's lessons. Larger air groups, better damage control, improved radar integration, faster deck handling. American carrier doctrine evolves from experience, not theory. Pilots train aggressively. Night operations improve. Fighter direction becomes a science. The mistakes of Midway are not hidden. They are institutionalized as lessons. For Japanese aviators, the opposite is often true. Survivors of Midway find it difficult to challenge entrenched beliefs. Questioning doctrine risks career stagnation. The culture that prized obedience and honor struggles to adapt to a war that increasingly demands flexibility. As 1943 approaches, the disparity widens. In April of that year, Admiral Yamamoto boards a transport aircraft to inspect forward bases in the Solomons. American codebreakers intercept the flight plan. Fighters intercept the plane over Bougainville. Yamamoto is killed when his aircraft crashes into the jungle. His death feels symbolic. The architect of Pearl Harbor, the man who understood America's industrial strength better than most of his peers, is gone. Midway had already broken his strategic vision. Now, the Navy loses its most capable mind. The Pacific War accelerates. Island by island, the Americans advance. Each operation, Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan, builds upon the confidence born at Midway. Carrier task forces operate with increasing coordination, hammering Japanese positions from the sea and air. Amphibious landings become more refined, though never less costly. Japanese resistance remains fierce. Courage is never in doubt, but it is no longer enough. By 1944, when the two navies meet again in decisive carrier combat during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the outcome is stark. For American veterans, Midway recedes into memory, overshadowed by later battles and ultimate victory. Yet those who were there never forget how fragile the outcome was. How easily the Pacific might have fallen into darkness had one decision gone differently. History often compresses events into inevitabilities. Midway was anything but inevitable. It was a collision of intelligence, courage, sacrifice, and chance, played out over a few violent hours that reshaped an entire war. And when the Japanese admirals finally understood what had happened, when the smoke cleared and the carriers did not answer their signals, the realization was devastating. The fleet they had trusted, the doctrine they had believed unassailable, was gone. Not defeated in a long campaign, destroyed in a single day.